At 68 years old, I thought I had weathered life's worst storms. The death of my beloved Harold 15 years ago, losing my only daughter Sadie in that terrible car accident when Edward was just 12, surviving breast cancer at 55, and navigating the financial struggles of raising a grieving grandson on a widow's pension. Then came the stroke that changed everything, landing me in the hospital for 6 grueling weeks of recovery that tested every ounce of strength I thought I had left. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in March while I was tending to the daffodils Harold had planted along our front walkway. One moment I was kneeling in the soft earth, admiring the bright yellow blooms that always reminded me spring was truly here, and the next moment I was lying face down in the flower bed, unable to move my left side or form the words to call for help. If it hadn't been for my neighbor Tom taking his morning walk and noticing my garden gloves still moving slightly, I might have died right there among Harold's flowers. When I finally returned home to Millfield after those endless weeks of rehabilitation, everything seemed different, somehow. Not just my weakened left side that required a walker for stability, or the way words sometimes escaped me mid-sentence like birds flying away before I could catch them, but something deeper. Something that made my chest tighten with an unexplainable dread every time I looked around the little blue house on Maple Street that had been my sanctuary for 32 years. My grandson Edward should have been there to welcome me back, to help me navigate this new reality where simple tasks like making coffee or reaching items on high shelves had become monumental challenges requiring careful planning and adaptive equipment. Where was the boy I would raise since he was 12, devastated and angry after losing his mother? Where was the young man I would put through college by working double shifts at the county clerk's office and taking weekend jobs cleaning offices? Where was my family? Have you ever experienced a betrayal so shocking it literally took your breath away? Please hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. Thank you so much for being here with me during what became the most challenging and ultimately transformative period of my entire life. The physical therapists at Millfield General had been wonderful during my rehabilitation, speaking gently about my progress and what to expect at home. Sarah, my primary therapist, was around my daughter's age and had this way of explaining exercises that made them feel achievable rather than impossible. Mrs. Henderson, she would say during our daily sessions, recovery isn't about getting back to exactly who you were before. It is about discovering who you can become with your new circumstances. But there was something in their careful explanations that unsettled me, as if they were preparing me for a life I wouldn't recognize. They talked about home modifications I would need, grab bars in the bathroom, ramps for my walker, support systems, family involvement, medical alert buttons. The occupational therapist, a kind man named David, had even suggested I might want to consider transitional living arrangements while I adjusted to my post-stroke limitations. Where is Edward during all these conversations? I kept wondering. My only living relative, the boy I would loved and nurtured like my own son when Sadie died in that head-on collision with a drunk driver. He was supposed to be my advocate, my helper, my family. The nurses kept asking about him, expecting him to be involved in discharge planning, expecting him to be present for the family education sessions about stroke recovery and ongoing care needs. Oh, he has been so busy with work, I would tell them. Making excuses I didn't even believe myself. His contracting business, you know. Spring is a busy season for home repairs and renovations. But deep down, a cold fear was growing. Why hadn't he visited more than twice during my 6-week stay? Why were his visits so brief and awkward, filled with uncomfortable silences and glances at his watch? Why did he always seem eager to leave, promising to check on things at the house and make sure everything was ready for my return? Returning to my little blue house on Maple Street should have felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. I would live there for 32 years, ever since Harold passed and left me the small inheritance that made the down payment possible. We would looked at 17 houses before finding this one. A modest 2-bedroom with original hardwood floors and a kitchen window that faced east so I could watch the sunrise every morning while making coffee. Every corner held memories that had sustained me through the loneliest years after Harold's death. Every room told stories of the life I would build from nothing after losing everyone I loved most. The living room where Edward had practiced his high school graduation speech, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace, while I listened from the kitchen. The dining room where we would celebrated every birthday, holiday, and milestone. For 16 years. The small back bedroom that had been Sadie's when she was young. Then Edward's room when he came to live with me. And finally, my sewing room where I made quilts for church fundraisers and baby gifts for neighbors. But stepping through that familiar front door felt wrong, like entering someone else's space. The house looked the same, but the energy felt different, colder somehow. The air smelled stale, as if no one had been living here, breathing here, caring for this place that had always been so full of life and warmth. The silence hit me first. No welcoming embrace, no flowers on the kitchen table, no sign that anyone had been thinking about my homecoming. No welcome home. Grandma Dorothy banner, like the one Edward had made for my 60th birthday. Edward's truck wasn't in the driveway where I would expected to see it. No messages waited on my answering machine, though I would specifically ask the discharge nurse to call and let him know exactly when I would be arriving home. The quiet felt hostile, pressing against my ears until I wanted to cover them. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my refuge, the place where I could finally begin the real work of recovery in familiar surroundings. Instead, it felt like I was intruding in my own home. I moved slowly through the house, my walker tapping against the hardwood floors. Harold and I had refinished ourselves decades ago when we were young and everything seemed possible. We would spend an entire summer on our hands and knees, stripping layers of old varnish, sanding every board smooth, applying stain and polyurethane with painstaking care. Dorothy, Harold had said, wiping sweat from his forehead as we admired our work. These floors will outlast both of us. They will be beautiful long after we are gone. Everything looked the same, but felt foreign. The family photos on the mantel seemed to stare at me accusingly. Pictures of Sadie's high school graduation, Edward receiving his diploma, Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments that had felt so precious when I was living them. Had I imagined the closeness Edward and I shared? Had I misunderstood our relationship all these years? Had I been kidding myself about being loved and needed? Then I saw them. Documents spread across my dining room table like accusations waiting to be read. My hands shook as I reached for the papers, my right hand compensating for my left's new weakness that the therapist said might improve with continued exercises, but would never completely return to normal. The header made my heart drop into my stomach. Certificate of sale, residential property. I had to read the words 3 times before they made sense. The legal language seemed to swim before my eyes. Not because of stroke-related vision problems, but because my mind simply couldn't process what I was seeing. My house, my sanctuary, my home of 3 decades had been sold. While I lay in that hospital bed, struggling to remember how to form words correctly, fighting to regain control of my own body, relearning how to swallow without choking, Edward had sold everything I owned. The paperwork showed a closing date from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks when I was still learning to walk again with a physical therapist named Michael, who had infinite patience for my frustration and tears. 2 weeks when I was still trying to convince my tongue to work properly with a speech therapist who made me repeat simple phrases over and over until I wanted to scream. 2 weeks when I was still believing my grandson would be there when I needed him most. Still trusting that someone in this world truly cared about my well-being. He would sign as my power of attorney, a document I would given him 3 years ago when I would turn 65 and wanted to be prepared for emergencies. Just in case something happens to me, I would told him, sitting at this very dining room table with Richard Hendricks. My lawyer, I want to know someone I trust can make decisions if I am ever unable to. Edward had seemed honored by the responsibility, promising solemnly that he would always act in my best interests, always consider what I would want. My vision blurred, not from the stroke this time, but from tears of rage and disbelief that felt like acid burning my cheeks. How could he do this? How could the boy I would loved like my own son, who I would put through college by taking a second job at Miller's Diner, serving coffee and pie to truckers from 5 in the morning until noon? How could the young man I would supported through his messy divorce, his career changes, his financial mistakes, his periods of depression and uncertainty? How could he betray me so completely, so callously, so selfishly? The sale price made everything worse. $47,000, below market value. According to the assessment I would have done just 18 months ago when I would considered taking out a small home equity loan to help Edward start his contracting business. The house was worth at least $130,000. Maybe more with the improvements Harold and I had made over the years. But Edward had rushed it through like he couldn't wait to be rid of it. Like my life's work was an inconvenience to be disposed of as quickly as possible. My life's work, my security, my home sold like an unwanted burden. The buyer was listed as Millfield Development Company, some outfit from 3 towns over that I would never heard of. They probably planned to tear down my garden, where I would spend countless hours planting and nurturing flowers, vegetables, the rose bushes Harold brought me for our anniversary every year. They would probably destroy the oak tree Harold planted when we moved in, the one that had grown from a sapling to a magnificent giant that shaded half our backyard. I sank into my chair, the blue recliner Harold bought me for my 60th birthday because it supported my back just right and had become my favorite spot for reading and watching the birds at the feeder outside the window. Even this chair would be gone soon. Everything would be gone. The new owners would want possession within 30 days according to the contract. 30 days to pack up 32 years of memories. 30 years of building a life here. Decades of creating a home where love lived in every corner. The worst part wasn't even the money or the house itself, devastating as that was. It was the realization that Edward saw me as a burden to be disposed of. My stroke hadn't just weakened my body and affected my speech. It had revealed how little I meant to the person I loved most in this world. While I was fighting to recover, to come home, to rebuild my independence and learn to live with my new limitations, he was erasing my existence, eliminating the inconvenience of an elderly grandmother who might need care and attention. How long had he been planning this? Had he been waiting for something like my stroke to happen, waiting for an opportunity to take control of my life and make decisions that benefited him rather than me? Had all those years of love and sacrifice meant nothing to him? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder in his life? Someone useful until I became inconvenient. I called Edward that evening, my fingers fumbling with the phone buttons that suddenly seemed smaller and harder to manage than before my stroke. The simple act of dialing his number felt monumental, requiring careful concentration and multiple attempts. He answered. After 5 rings, his voice casual and cheerful, like nothing had happened, like my world hadn't been turned upside down. "Hey, Grandma Dorothy, how are you feeling? All settled in at home? I bet it feels good to be back in your own space after all those weeks in the hospital. How is the walking going? Are you managing okay with the walker?" His voice sounded so normal, so caring, that, for a moment, I wondered if I would misunderstood something about the papers on my table. But no, there they were. Official documents with legal seals and signatures. Proof that my life had been sold while I was helpless to stop it. "Edward," I said, my words coming out slower than I wanted, the way they did when I was emotional or tired. The speech therapist had warned me that stress would affect my speech patterns, making the words harder to find and form correctly. I found the house sale papers. "What have you done to me?" Silence stretched across the phone line, and I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him trying to decide how to respond. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted from cheerful concern to defensive irritation, the voice of someone who had been caught doing something wrong and resented being questioned about it. "Look, Grandma, we talked about this before your stroke, remember? We discussed how you were going to need assisted living eventually, especially as you got older and your health declined. I thought the house would just be sitting empty while you were in rehabilitation, becoming a money pit that would drain your resources. I was trying to be practical, trying to protect your financial future. We had never talked about this, never. Not once in all, our conversations about aging, about my future, about my wishes for end-of-life care. I would been very clear that I wanted to stay in my own home as long as possible, that I would rather hire help and make modifications than move to any kind of institutional setting. I would seen too many friends wither away in nursing homes, losing their independence and dignity along with their familiar surroundings. We never talked about this, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by anger that was burning away the fog of confusion and hurt. You never asked me what I wanted. You never even told me you were thinking about doing it. You just made a decision about my life without including me in the conversation. You were sick, he said, like that explained everything, like that justified every choice he would made without my knowledge or consent. You weren't in any condition to make major decisions. You had a stroke, Grandma. You couldn't even remember the nurses' names half the time. I had power of attorney for a reason. I was protecting your interests, making sure you would have the money you need for proper care, protecting my interests. The phrase made my blood boil, sending heat through my body that had nothing to do with the mild spring weather outside. Protecting his interests, more likely, protecting his future inheritance. Protecting himself from the inconvenience of having an elderly grandmother who might need help and attention and care. I thought about all the years I would protected his interests, working double shifts at the county clerk's office and taking weekend jobs to pay his college tuition when his parents' life insurance wasn't enough to cover everything. Taking out a second mortgage on this very house to help him start his contracting business when he was 25 and full of dreams and ambition. Lending him money for his divorce lawyer when his marriage fell apart. Money he would never repay despite repeated promises. Babysitting his daughter Emma every weekend for 2 years so he could work extra jobs to get back on his feet financially. This is my home, Edward, I said, each word deliberate and clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. This is my life you have sold without permission. This is 32 years of memories, of work, of love that you have thrown away like garbage. It is just a house, Grandma. You will be happier somewhere with people to help you. Somewhere safe and secure, where you don't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep. Somewhere designed for people with your limitations. There are some really nice assisted living places in the area. I have already started looking at options for you. Just a house. 32 years, reduced to just a house. The place where I would nurse Harold through his final illness, watching him sleep in the hospital bed. We would set up in the living room so he could look out at his garden. The place where I would celebrated Edward's high school graduation with a party for 30 neighbors and friends. The place where I would created a life from the ashes of my daughter's death, where I would found the strength to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. The place where I would quilted blankets for every baby born in our neighborhood, where I would hosted book club meetings for 15 years, where I would grown vegetables that I shared with anyone who needed fresh food. The place where I would learn to live alone after Harold died, where I would discovered my own strength and resilience and independence. I am buying it back, I told him, surprised by the firmness in my own voice, by the clarity that cut through the emotional fog, and you are not welcome here anymore. I hung up before he could respond, my hands steadier than they would been since the stroke. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished version of myself the doctors kept preparing me to accept, not the helpless victim everyone seemed to expect me to become, but the woman who had survived Harold's death, who had raised a grieving grandson, who had built a life through sheer determination and stubborn love. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Richard Hendricks, who had handled Harold's estate years ago and helped me with various legal matters over the years. Richard was around my age, a kind man who understood that being elderly didn't mean being incompetent, who had always treated me with respect and genuine concern. His voice was warm when he answered, immediately recognizable, despite my not having spoken to him in over a year. Dorothy, he said, with genuine pleasure, I heard about your stroke from Tom Patterson when I ran into him at the post office. How are you managing? Are you back home now? How is the recovery going? I need help, Richard, I said, getting straight to the point because I would learn that direct communication was easier for me post-stroke than trying to make small talk. Edward had no right to sell my house while I was in the hospital. I was incapacitated, not declared incompetent. Can I get it back? Richard was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear papers rustling in the background as he presumably reached for a notepad. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to his professional tone, serious and focused. Tell me exactly what happened. Dorothy, start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details. I need to understand the timeline and the circumstances. I explained everything. The stroke, the 6 weeks in rehabilitation, coming home to find the sale documents, the below-market price, Edward's use of the power of attorney I would given him for emergencies. Richard asked careful questions about my mental state during hospitalization, about any conversations I might have had with Edward about selling the house, about the specific terms of the power of attorney document. Power of attorney doesn't give him the right to sell your primary residence unless you are permanently incapacitated or it is specifically outlined in the document, Richard said after reviewing his notes. And from what you are telling me, you were never declared incompetent by any court or medical professional. Let me pull up your power of attorney document and review it carefully. Then I will need to look at the sale contracts and see what we can do. By noon, Richard called back with news that made my heart race with hope for the first time since I would found those terrible papers. Dorothy, the sale was legally questionable at best. Your power of attorney document specifically states that sale of real property requires either permanent incapacitation or your explicit written consent. Edward had neither. Additionally, the development company had to have known they were getting the property significantly under market value, which raises questions about whether they were acting in good faith. What does that mean for me? I asked, afraid to hope too much, but feeling a spark of possibility I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. It means they might be willing to sell the house back to you to avoid legal complications and potential lawsuits. If you can match their investment plus a reasonable profit, I think we can make this work. Do you have access to funds? I had the money. Harold's life insurance policy that I would barely touched over the years, my savings from 30 years of careful budgeting and frugal living, and the small pension from my decades working at the county clerk's office. I would been careful with money all my life, saving for emergencies and unexpected expenses, never knowing when I might need financial security. Well, now I needed it more than ever. Yes, I told Richard, feeling strength and determination flow through me like electricity. I have the money. How do we make this happen? The process took 2 weeks of intense legal negotiations, 2 weeks of living in limbo while lawyers discussed my life like a business transaction. Every day felt like an eternity as I waited for updates, wondering if the development company would agree to sell back or if I would be forced to find somewhere else to live with only 30 days' notice. Richard kept me informed every step of the way, calling each evening to update me on the day's progress. The development company's lawyers initially tried to claim the sale was completely legal and binding, but when Richard presented evidence of the questionable power of attorney use and the below-market pricing, they began to reconsider their position. They know they cut corners, Richard explained during one of our evening conversations. They wanted a quick deal and didn't do their due diligence about the power of attorney limitations. Now they are worried about lawsuits and bad publicity. A story about a development company taking advantage of an elderly stroke victim wouldn't be good for their business. Edward tried calling several times during those 2 weeks. I let every call go to the answering machine, listening to his messages become increasingly desperate and angry. His voice changed from confident justification to confused pleading to barely controlled rage as he realized I was serious about fighting back. Grandma, please call me back. We need to talk about this situation before you make any rash decisions. You are not thinking clearly because of the stroke. The stress of fighting this isn't good for your recovery. I was trying to help you, trying to make sure you would be taken care of properly. Don't let some lawyer fill your head with unrealistic expectations. His messages revealed so much about how he saw me, not as a competent adult capable of making her own decisions, but as a confused elderly woman whose stroke had somehow rendered her incapable of understanding her own best interests. The condescension in his voice made me even more determined to prove him wrong. When Richard called with the final agreement, I actually laughed out loud for the first time since my stroke. The house would be mine again by month's end, purchased back for the original sale price, plus $10,000 profit for the development company, and they would even cover all the legal fees as part of the settlement. "Dorothy," Richard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "you are going to get your house back. And frankly, I think this whole experience has shown Edward that you are not someone to be underestimated. You have fought for what is rightfully yours and won." The day I got my house back felt like being reborn. Not physically, my left side would always be weaker, and my speech would sometimes stumble when I was tired or emotional. But mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I felt powerful in a way I would forgotten was possible. I was no longer a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was a woman who had faced adversity and emerged victorious. That evening, Edward finally showed up at my door. He looked tired, older somehow, like the past month had aged him years. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his hair uncombed. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. When I opened the door, he stood there for a moment, without speaking, as if trying to decide what to say. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice uncertain in a way I would never heard before. "Can we please talk? I think there has been some misunderstanding about everything that has happened." "About what?" I asked, not inviting him in. I stood in my doorway, leaning on my walker, feeling strong and centered in my own space, in my own home that was truly mine again. About this crazy plan to buy back the house. About you living alone when you clearly need help and supervision. About being practical and realistic about your limitations after the stroke. About planning for the future instead of pretending everything can go back to the way it was before. "Practical," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. Was it practical to sell my home without telling me? Was it practical to assume I couldn't make my own decisions about my own life? Was it practical to treat me like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected and consulted? He stepped closer, and I could see the frustration building in his eyes, the same look he would had as a teenager when I wouldn't let him do something dangerous or irresponsible. "You had a stroke, Grandma. You cannot pretend nothing has changed. You cannot live in denial about your limitations. You need help with daily activities. You need supervision to make sure you are safe. You need someone to manage your finances and medical decisions." "I do need help," I agreed, my voice calm but firm. "But I need it from someone who respects me, who asks what I want instead of deciding for me, who treats me like an adult instead of a child. That is not you, Edward. You have shown me that you think my stroke made me incompetent, that you believe you know what is best for me better than I do." The conversation continued for over an hour, going in circles that led nowhere productive. Edward couldn't understand why I was being so stubborn, why I wouldn't just accept his version of what was best for me, why I couldn't see that he had been trying to protect me from myself. I couldn't make him understand that selling my house wasn't about practical considerations or financial planning. It was about erasing my autonomy, my dignity, my fundamental right to make my own choices about how to live my own life. Every time I tried to explain how his actions had made me feel, he dismissed my emotions as confusion caused by the stroke. Every time I pointed out that he would never ask what I wanted, he insisted that my medical condition made my preferences irrelevant. Every time I expressed hurt about his betrayal of my trust, he became defensive and angry, insisting that everything he had done was motivated by love and concern. Finally, I told him the truth that had been crystallizing in my mind throughout our conversation. "Edward, I love you. I will always love you because you are my family. And I raised you and you will always be part of my heart. But I don't trust you anymore. You have shown me that when things get difficult, you will make decisions about my life without including me. You have shown me that you see my stroke as evidence that I am no longer competent to live my own life. I cannot live with that attitude. I will not live that way." He left that night looking defeated and confused, still unable to understand how his actions had been anything other than loving and protective. I watched him drive away and felt both relief and sadness washing over me in equal measures. Relief that I would stood up for myself and reclaimed my autonomy. Sadness that it had come to this. That our relationship had been damaged, perhaps beyond repair. But I would learn something crucial about myself during this ordeal. Being elderly and having limitations didn't mean surrendering my right to live my own life according to my own values. Having a stroke didn't automatically make me incompetent or incapable of making decisions about my own future. Needing help with some activities didn't mean I needed someone else to control every aspect of my existence. The weeks that followed were both challenging and rewarding as I slowly rebuilt my life on my own terms. I hired Mrs. Patterson, a wonderful woman in her 50s who came 3 times a week to help with housework and occasionally drive me to medical appointments. Unlike Edward, she treated me with respect and genuine affection, asking about my preferences and following my lead rather than trying to take control. I joined a stroke support group at the community center, connecting with other people who understood the unique challenges of recovery and the frustration of being treated like children by well-meaning family members. The group met every Tuesday evening, and I found tremendous comfort in sharing experiences with people who truly understood what I was going through. Most importantly, I learned to ask for help on my own terms. When I needed assistance, I found people who respected my independence while providing the support I genuinely required. My neighbor Tom started checking on me daily, not because he thought I was helpless, but because he was also widowed and understood the value of friendship and mutual support. The young woman at Miller's grocery store always made sure I had help carrying bags to my car, treating me with kindness and respect rather than pity or condescension. Dr. Martinez, my new primary care physician, included me as a full partner in all medical decisions, explaining options clearly and respecting my choices about treatment and follow-up care. Edward tried reaching out several more times over the following months. His messages gradually shifted from anger and confusion to what sounded like genuine remorse and self-reflection. "Grandma, I have been thinking about what you said about respect and autonomy. I think I misunderstood what you needed from me. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just scared of losing you and handled everything completely wrong." His final message came 6 months after I got my house back. "I miss you, Grandma. I miss our Sunday dinners and talking about everything that is happening in our lives. I miss your advice and your stories and your laugh. I know I messed up badly, and I am sorry. If you ever want to talk, I am here. I am working on understanding where I went wrong." I kept that message, playing it several times before deciding how to respond. Not because I wanted to punish him or make him suffer, but because I needed to be absolutely certain that any reconciliation would be built on mutual respect rather than his assumption that time would make me forget how he would betray my trust. 3 months later, I did call Edward. Our conversation was different, this time more careful, more respectful. He asked about my health, my daily routine, my needs and concerns, but he asked genuine questions rather than making assumptions. When I mentioned considering some modifications to make the house safer and more accessible, he offered to help research options and contractors rather than telling me what I should do. "Grandma," he said toward the end of our conversation, "I want you to know that I have been seeing a counselor to work through my own fears about aging and loss. I think when you had the stroke, I panicked about losing you the way we lost Mom, and I handled everything wrong. I treated you like you were dying instead of recovering. I am sorry. It wasn't the same relationship we would had before. That easy trust, once broken, couldn't be simply repaired with apologies and good intentions. But it was a beginning towards something new, something potentially healthier and more honest. A relationship built on mutual respect rather than assumptions about what elderly people could or couldn't handle. The most surprising discovery through all of this was how much strength I still possessed. Not physical strength, though my physical therapy was progressing well and I was gradually regaining function and confidence. But inner strength, the kind that comes from knowing you can face difficult choices and still choose what is right for yourself, even when everyone around you thinks you are wrong. I would spend so many years after Harold's death focusing on taking care of Edward, making sure he was stable and successful and happy. Somewhere in that process, I would gradually started seeing myself through his eyes, as someone who needed protecting rather than someone capable of protecting herself. My stroke had initially seemed to confirm that perception, making me temporarily dependent on others for basic care and decision-making. But Edward's betrayal had been transformative in the most unexpected way. It forced me to rediscover my own voice, my own power, my own worth beyond what I could provide for others. It reminded me that I was still a whole person with valid opinions, legitimate preferences, and the fundamental right to live according to my own values. Now, when I sit on my front porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the neighborhood I chose to stay in, I feel a contentment I haven't experienced in years. It is not the contentment of having everything easy or comfortable, but the deep satisfaction of having fought for what mattered most and emerged victorious. The satisfaction of knowing I can still advocate for myself when necessary. My house isn't just a building anymore. It is a symbol of my refusal to be diminished by age or illness, my insistence on dignity and autonomy, my claim to the right to live my own life, according to my own values and preferences. Every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own room, surrounded by my own choices and memories, I am reminded that age and illness may change what I can do, but they don't change who I am at my core. The roses Harold planted are blooming again this spring, more beautiful than ever. Mrs. Patterson says, "It is because I have been taking such good care of them, learning new techniques for gardening with physical limitations. But I think it is because they know they are home to stay. Just like me, they know they will not be uprooted or transplanted against their will." This experience taught me that family isn't just about blood relationships or shared history. Real family is about respect, trust, and supporting each other's autonomy and dignity. Real love doesn't try to control or diminish the people we care about. It seeks to understand and empower them, to honor their choices even when we don't fully understand or agree with them. I hope Edward truly learns that lesson. I hope our relationship can eventually be rebuilt on that foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. But even if it cannot, I have learned that I can be whole and happy and fulfilled on my own terms. That is a gift I never expected to give myself at 68, but it has turned out to be the most valuable discovery of my entire life. What do you think about family members making major decisions without consultation during medical crises? Have you ever had to stand up to someone you loved to protect your own autonomy and dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need reminding that our age doesn't diminish our right to live with dignity and make our own choices about our own lives.